Hello and welcome to this tutorial. My name is Ben Morgan, and in this tutorial I'm going to teach you guys how to do camera tracking. Everything from the original filming of the shot, the real live action shot, to finding out what your camera data needs to be, and then finally doing the obvious tracking of the scene and then compositing in a simple 3D element into that scene. So let's begin. What is camera tracking? Camera tracking is what many companies and movies do nowadays, where they need to take a real life camera, they need to take that camera motion and they need to map it. It's also called camera mapping because that's kind of what you're doing. You're mapping the motion of the camera. And so you do this by, you might see on like green screens for something like Avengers or something, they have little markers on the green screens now. And that's because they need to track those markers so that they can get the three-dimensional motion of the camera. So obviously to begin this tutorial, you're going to need to have some video that you want to track. If you have a Handycam or anything better than that, you're going to be fine. If you have a iPhone camera or anything like that, you might have a little trouble because an iPhone, the camera, it's a strange camera. It's not like a lens. It's really narrow, so getting good data from an iPhone camera, I have found, is very hard, but you can look it up. I'm sure somebody's figured out the settings in Blender, but I haven't been able to get any good results. But I am using a Canon Vixia HF R22, I believe. Yeah, R22. And it took me about a year to figure out the right settings I need to do to get a good track, but I finally figured it out, and I want to show you guys both how you can get a good track and how you can find the settings for your camera. So let's just begin. Enough talking. So the first thing we need to do is have our video we recorded converted into an image sequence. And if you don't know how to do that, you can look at my channel. There's a tutorial on how to do image sequences. I could also put a little annotation right up here. And basically, you need to have a sequence of JPEGs or PNGs for your video instead of whatever codec you use, because Blender just does a lot better with image sequences than it does with video files. It will also allow you to scrub through easier. It's just much better. So let's go into the up here, let's go into motion tracking, and let's open up our image sequence. So I have it in this big sequence folder. You can see I have a ton of images, and you can see since it's a sequence, I can just scrub through really easily, and everything is fine. So I can just play through. Okay, well, when you play, it doesn't do very well, but you can scrub through and it's fine. Okay, so what we need to do is, you can see when I recorded this, I have what's called parallax, which is where the camera is rotating around a central point, or not a central point, but it's just rotating, and so objects are moving in 3D space, and they are moving forwards and backwards in the frame, which is important because that allows the camera in Blender to get more data. And if you don't have a lot of parallax, if you don't have a lot of camera rotation or movement, you're going to have a harder time getting a good track. So you see I have these notepads on my desk, and they have little markers on them. Those are the markers that we're going to track. We're going to place little trackers on them, and it's going to track the contrasting points. It's easier if they're more contrast, if they're high contrast. So this is actually the easiest way that you get a high contrast point. Obviously, if you're doing an outside scene, it'll be harder. You're going to have to, find some cracks or window edges or something like that where you're going to have some high contrast. But just know that the tracker does best when there are high contrast points. Okay, so you'll also realize that I placed these kind of far apart. If I had bundled them close together, it would not work out very well. And why is that? Well, that's because if I press Control left click and I add a marker, and I go over here to display the search pattern, you can see that the search area, this is the area in which this little area, this little dot, is going to be looked for. So these pixels are going to be looked for inside of this square. And so if, obviously these are very similar looking squares, or little dots, so like if my area was, say if I scale it up, if it was that big, this could be this, or this really easily. So it's important that you spread them out so that you won't get them mixed up. But obviously there are going to be times when it's going to jump around. I'll show you how to combat that later. But for now, we have this marker tracked. By the way, I'll have these images in the description. You can download the image sequence files and stuff. If you don't have a video that you yourself want to work on, you can download these in the description. So let's press Control T, or you can also press play right over here. And you can see that it goes forward and it tracked fine. You can see over here that it's staying in the middle of the dot, but then right here it stopped. So we have to press G to grab. We have to grab it and press play again, and it just sped forward and it did everything perfectly. So that's good. One of the reasons that they have the graph right here is because sometimes you'll have it jump. Let me just demonstrate what that'll look like. Say everything was going well, but then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't know where the thing is on this frame. It'll have this, like, it'll spike like that, so you can see it there, but say it was going really fast and you didn't see it. Obviously right here, you see this big red spike right there. That means that something went wrong. If everything is fairly uniform, then you're pretty much okay. But if there's a spike like that, then that will mean that you have a problem that you need to deal with. So let me just save this. Okay. So let's go and just place all our other markers. So we'll place one here, Control T, and it moved off, so we'll keep doing that, Control T. And you can see here, you can see up in the graph that there are little spikes, and that is shown right here where it's bouncing around. So we need to go and we need to move it so that it on each frame is as close to the frame before as we can make it. Will never be perfect. And now we're going to press here. Another thing to realize is that you'll notice that I have, let's move this, Control T is what I'm doing to track. You'll notice that I have this stack of note cards and dots on top of that too. That's really important. It's important that I have these sticky notes because you need 2 levels of planes or whatever that will give you more 3D space. So if these are the only things I'm tracking in the scene, obviously it would be better if I could track some things over here, but I didn't put enough markers for this. It's important that you have trackers on more than one surface. Like if I only had it on this one surface, it would be hard for Blender. It will be harder for Blender to find a good 3D track. So it's just something to keep in mind. Let's track this one now. Okay, you can see that right here. There's a ton of jumping around, so let's just zoom in there and look at what we have. Alt right arrow on your keyboard will go forward 1 frame at a time. That's sometimes helpful to use when you're trying to fix these little problems. Okay, so that seems good. Okay, and let's just keep doing this 1 mark at a time. In some tutorials I've seen they time-lapse do this, but I find it's best if you see the whole process, since if I time-lapse I might skip over some problem that you had, but maybe I'll come across that same exact problem, and then you'll know how to fix that. Okay, so you see that we have some problems right there. It's perfectly fine. We can go in and fix that. It's also best if you're not filming something up close like this. It's also best that you render or you record at the highest resolution you can, and also one of the highest FPS you can. Now that's frames per second, not like if you do 60 FPS, that's amazing. That's perfect for this. If you do 60i, do not record in 60i if you're trying to do a track. It will not work out well, because when you're trying to do all these frames, 60i only combines the frames. As far as I know, it does it every other frame, and that makes it really difficult for you to get a good track. I highly don't record in 60i. I highly recommend that you don't. Yeah, my camera actually can record in 60i, and I'm like, oh, 60 FPS, that's good, but 60 FPS is not 60i. Okay, this was recorded, I believe, at 3 millimeters. It was the farthest out I could zoom out my camera, which is also important. It's important that if you have a camera that can tell you what level you're zoomed in or out, it's important that you note that. And if you zoom in or out at all during your shot, just realize that that is going to be extremely difficult to track, since Blender has to have that same focal length. So you have to be like, okay, right at this point, I zoom from 3 focal length to, I don't know, 35 or something. If you don't know exactly what point you do that, one, it's going to make the track really difficult to track, and two, it's just not going to be fun. So don't change your focal length. If anything, just record at the lowest focal length you can, or the highest, or just stay at one continual focal length, because in the end, you have to give Blender that camera data. So if you don't know that camera data, then you won't get a good track. So you can see here that there are some frames where it jumps to the other dot. So I'm just going back to the frame where it first jumps, and then I do Alt, oops, see, right there. I do Alt right arrow, and I just go forward one frame at a time until it either gets to the end or it seems to be sticking well. So if I just right-click each of these and I look at the graph, you can see that not much is changed for each of the graphs, and that's good. We'll just do this last one. You want as many different markers as you can. If you have, 15 or more markers, that's great. Let's just delete that one. That was not good at all. Let's try that again. Let's just start it one frame at a time. Control T. Okay, jumped there. You can go back and fix that. The more trackers you have, and the wider variety of trackers you have, the easier it will be for you to track. Okay, so you can see on the graph right here, we have a ton of spikes. So we're just going to go forward, Alt, right arrow on your keyboard, and fix those. Keep going, Alt, right arrow, until you get to a point where it is, okay, now it's fine. Keep going, we have another spike right up there. And Alt, right arrow, we'll get rid of that. Oh, no, see, we got that. Good. Okay, so now if we just scroll through our animation, if we scrub through it, you can see that we have all our markers, none of them are jumping around, and it's perfect. So, now let's get into applying this camera data to our Blender camera. So over here, you can see that we have our camera data panel, and my camera has a sensor width of 1.8 and a focal length of, oh, I recorded this at 3 millimeters. And you could find that out if you look up your camera. It'll say sensor width, and it'll say like something divided by something. You just divide those two numbers, and you just move the decimal a couple, and that's how you find the sensor width. Yeah, it's kind of a complicated subject, but yeah. Hopefully, one of your cameras, maybe it's one of these. If it is one of these, then you're in luck, because all this really is a ratio. You could record really at any focal length and any sensor, or not any sensor width, but all it needs is the correct ratio. The focal length doesn't really matter. So this is 1.8 to 3. I could multiply this by 2 or 10, and it would be the same thing. It could be 30 millimeters, but the width would have to be 18. So that's how that works. Okay, so next we're gonna look at our keyframes. And so right now our keyframes are at frame 1 and 30, and it's important that your keyframes are at places where there has been a lot of camera motion. So at frame 1 and at frame 30, there isn't much camera motion going on. So it'd be best if we put this somewhere like where our camera has rotated like that. So 225 would be a good keyframe B. That will give us a good 3D depth to give Blender. Yeah, let's save this, and we can just click Solve Camera Motion now. And you can see here, the solve error is 0.46. That's pretty good. It's pretty low. You can see nothing happened to the camera. That's because we have to go back to our default view. We have to go to Constraints and add a camera solver constraint to the Blender camera. And you can see now that it rotates and it doesn't jump around. It is a pretty good track. But now let's go back to motion tracking, and let's split this view right here. Let's make this the 3D view. And let's do a few things. We're going to do some scene reconstruction. So let's press 0 to look through the camera, and we're going to press N and display background images, add image, make it a movie clip, and by default it just goes to the movie clip that's already in our sequencer. So that's perfect. You can see here that these tracker markers that it added are sticking to the points that we made, which is just what we want. But it's kind of crowded right now. It'd be really hard to place an object in that scene. So what we have to do is set the scale and set the orientation of everything. So to do that, select two markers and click Reconstruction, Set Scale. And you can see that it says Set Scale of Scene by Scaling Camera. So that will make everything a lot smaller in relation to the camera. And you can also, if you wanted, let's go back to default view for a second. If you wanted to also, since the camera's way big, you could size down the actual viewport size of the, or not the sensor size, I'm sorry, don't do that, that's not gonna be good. Make sure it's still 1.8. Make the size of the camera a little smaller, and that will be good. Okay, now go back to motion tracking, and we're gonna set our floor to be where this floor is right now. So you have to set 3 points on preferably a flat surface, and do reconstruction, set floor. That will make it so that those 3 points are on the floor of your 3D scene. So you can see here that if we hide the cube, we have these markers right here, which represent those that sticky note, and then a little bit up, you have these 3 markers, which represent the sticky note pad. So that's really cool. Okay, and next we can, if you want, make it so that like this is the origin. Doesn't really matter. Let's see what else we could do. Set wall. If you wanted to, also you could, if you had a wall in the scene, you could say reconstruction, set wall, and that would make it a wall in the scene. Okay, so now let's just do some basic reconstruction. We're not going to do anything fancy. Basically, all we're going to do is Shift-A, add mesh plane, and then Shift-A, add mesh cube, and we're going to scale this cube down, S and Z, and we're going to grab it up, and G, Shift-Z to grab it just on the X and Y plane, and just go to front view and press 5 on your numpad. And let's line this up with these 3 points. see that it's kind of rotated strangely. That's weird. Maybe the pad was rotated or something. But this is going to be our pad, and this is going to be our plane. And then let's just add in a monkey to have something to be in our view. Let's rotate it a little bit, scale it up. G, Shift, C, grab, GZ. Should probably just put on my screencast keys so that you can see this. Okay, let's go back to default view so that you can press 0 to see your camera. And okay, so let's just set this ground plane display type to wire so that we can press N and display background images, and we have to do that again so that we can see our plane. So you can see here that our monkey is sticking to the floor, and it's perfect. Okay, so let's just orient this monkey so that it is on our plane. That's good. And now let's we can use this lamp object. We can make it a little yellow since the light in my scene was a little yellow. Look at it textured. We can rotate this a little bit, maybe scale it down, because we're not going to use that to represent the object. We're going to represent that object's texture with that. Okay, so you can see here that it's rotated incorrectly there. Okay, that's close enough. No, let's just get rid of that. To track that, you probably have to do object tracking, which would consist of pretty much the same process, except you'd have to track it to object, but that's a whole nother tutorial, so we won't go into tracking an object to fit another object. That's really cool. I did an Iron Man helmet effect using that method, and I will definitely do a tutorial on that someday. Okay, so let's select our plane, and we're going to start the compositing now. Give it a new material, make it go to shadow, go to shadows only, because we only want this plane to be our shadow plane. And under Suzanne, let's just smooth it. Let's add a subsurf modifier. Okay. And right now, if we go to compositing, before we do that, let's go to our layers or scene panel. Go to render layers. I'm terribly sorry about that. Sorry about that. So under render layers, we have to uncheck sky. So that Blender will not render our sky. Basically, that makes it so that everywhere where there is not an object, it is alpha, and that is perfect for what we're doing, because we can go to compositing and click use nodes and Shift A, add input movie clip, and it's already by default set to the clip that we already have in the sequencer. Shift A, add color alpha over, and Shift A, add distort scale. We'll scale our movie clip to what our render size is, so we have to change it from relative to render size, and like that. Connect that right there, and this image right here, I believe, is the correct order. And now let's just save it. F12 to render, and Alt H. I guess we hid this for some reason. Let's just delete that. F12 to render. See here that we have our shadow. We have a basic shadow, and we have our object, and it's right over our scene. Let's just add in some ambient occlusion and environment lighting. Set it to multiply and scale down the factor a little bit. And you know, you could do a lot more with this. You could edit the shadow pass. You could add in like a separate layer for ambient occlusion and stuff like that. Let's just uncheck those for now. But we're not even going to do that. Let's just add a material though to our monkey. Give it something. Turn down the specularity. This might be a little too yellow. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just look at what it looks like. Our monkey's just looking very CG right now because we're not doing much with anything. But you can see here that we have our basic scene. We have a shadow, sort of, And if we change this to a sun lamp, it might give us more of a shadow. Yeah, it'll give us a lot more shadow. Okay, so change that to a sun lamp and grab it around and turn down the energy. And yeah, there we go. Now it's more of a shadow. You can make it a little softer by turning up the samples and the soft size, put it at like 1. And if you look at it now, it's a little softer of a shadow. And that's good. Okay, so that's fine with that. And anything else? Let's see. Oh, if you wanted to render this, you just have to render it to an H.264 format. But really, right now, since we have our movie clip and our render layer in the composite, if you just click render animation, obviously to a movie format, and we go back to our default view, we would have this monkey sticking to the desk in a 3D track. So that's pretty cool. Press Alt-A. You can see that it's sticking to the desk. So that is how you do 3D camera tracking inside of Blender. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.